It's a special edition of Cannabis Capitol's Pop Politics. I'm the show's host, Chris Egger, and I'm really excited to be joined today by a panel of experts to talk all things politics coming out of Tuesday's recall election. And we have a result now, and we're moving forward. But first and foremost, I want to introduce the guests tonight. To my left, I have Mr. Adam Hijazi, who is a co-founder and board president right now of the Long Beach Collective Association. I have Mr. Virgil Grant, who was a proponent for Measure M in the city of Los Angeles, which led to legalization of cannabis at the municipal level there in the city, and also is a co-founder of the California Minority Alliance. And finally, I have Mr. Kiernan, who is the executive director of the Weed for Warriors project. And all three of these gentlemen have spent some time in the legislative environment, working at the state level and in their local communities on passing legislation. So we're going to have a discussion tonight about the future of cannabis politics moving into the later part of 2021, as well as into 2022, which is an election year. But first and foremost, I want to ask everybody, did Tuesday tell you anything about politics in California, and what are your thoughts about the outcome in terms of how it affects the cannabis industry?
Well, I think, look, Tuesday there was a lot of politics, and I think cannabis politics was definitely, in my opinion, not on the forefront of issues. I think there was a lot of other politics, the pandemic, what's going on in the world, the Republican versus Democrat, even some of this carryover from, the January 6th election. But really, when it comes to cannabis, I think we still have our issues. We still have, the things that we have to deal with in regards to the regulations, the taxation, and the policies itself. So there's still a lot of work to do. Hopefully there's a sense of, something to look at when it comes to, the governor now getting back into his office after this recall.
And Virgil, I saw you kind of shaking your head. I don't know if it was an agreement or disagreement, but what are your general thoughts about, politics now that we've come out of Tuesday? And, is it time to get back to work for the governor with the cannabis community?
Absolutely. I believe, that cannabis has kind of been an absent subject within politics lately. We need to interject that back into the conversation of politics moving forward, because we're the highest tax industry around, but the less represented.
It's interesting that you say that, and I'd ask you, Sean. After hearing that, did you see anything that you didn't expect to happen on Tuesday, or did you?
No, I think the status quo will be emboldened. If that's a good or positive thing, I don't know. I don't know if Larry Elder would have been a whole new level of dysfunction in government in California. I don't know if it would have helped. So we have a lot to overcome, and I don't know if we can do it legislatively.
Let me ask this question of you then. Do you think that it took the eye off the ball for the governor for a lot of issues to have to be preparing for the recall election?
Yes.
Okay. Because that, in simply put, right, would you guys agree with that the governor's attention has been elsewhere? I know, I can't remember who, we had talked about this, but, he was a leader coming into 2016 and Prop 64, supporter of it, right? And we've definitely seen progress, I guess, in creating, some legislation. But do you think his eye was off the ball?
Definitely. Look, when you're going through a recall or you're getting these types of things, you're between campaigning and work, the time's going to become limited, And I think, look, from the governor in 2016, when that was coming out, I think everybody was really happy and excited that we can hear a voice that will talk to cannabis and not in a way that's so full of stigma. Mm-hmm. So that was really where everybody was excited that we were actually having these higher level legislators talking about cannabis like it could be something that could be part of the community. But that is completely different than what an actual policy could look like in regards to how the businesses, the public, communities, and all of the different people can get together. And granted that it hasn't been done for years and years, and there's things that everyone was going to experience for the first time. But I see those as two different things.
Right, okay. And Virgil, we talked about this. You've now, both of you two, actually, Adam, both of you two, and I know you, for SB 34 was a real victory for the Warriors, right? The idea that there was an ability to donate cannabis and product, and that pathway for compassionate giving of a medicinal product that so many people need. But how are you guys feeling right now? So since 2016 and since the passage of Measure M and since the local, on the state level right now, Virgil, what is it that the governor should be refocusing on with us right now in your eyes, right? We've talked a little bit about the
Yes.
success of Measure M and the success of the industry throughout the state.
I think the biggest issue is when we pass a measure, we think that's it, we won, or that's it, it's done. But there has not been a measure, and I don't care whether it's cannabis or not, that's been passed in this country that is complete. And you have to always go back and clean things up. In this industry, there's a lot of cleanup that needs to be done, and we need to revisit, refocus, and readdress what those cleanups are. Because as it stands right now, we're still in a mess. In between all of the implementations of the metric system, which completely does not work for the cannabis industry at all. And even the people who brought metrics to us had admit that it doesn't work well for the cannabis industry. And they don't think it'll stick around in our industry long because it doesn't work for us. Things like that, we as an industry, we need to really understand what's at stake here, come back together, not one more time, but come back together for a final moment. Understand how big businesses operate in America. There's one lobbyist that represents these big conglomerate and corporations, and we're going to have to operate in the same fashion. We're going to have to get somebody that truly represents our interests to speak for us in areas that we are not being heard in.
Yeah, I've always said it's a struggle because unlike alcohol, so we have an adult use kind of label put upon us, right? But we have this holistic wellness and medicinal component to our product and our industry, right? And to the mantra. So it's always going to be tough for us to be seen in the right light, I think, in a legislative environment. No one really knows how to deal with us, and yet they're not listening to us, right? And I know, Sean, you've spent some time up in Sacramento. SB 34 was a victory for the industry post AUMA, right? What is your sense of the climate up in Sacramento right now in terms of listening to the industry?
Dysfunction. One of the big problems with 64 is we embedded so much that's wrong with what's going on. You cannot change any of it without either a supermajority, which you're not going to get for most of the stuff, and or another citizens initiative. So the reality is, how do we best go forward? And I'm of the view that this cannot be fixed without another citizens initiative. And that isn't an ideal solution for a lot of people, right? Because it costs money, it creates change, fear of change. Well, what's that mean to me? What's that mean to an embedded industry that now has some preferential treatment? But what's it also mean to the communities? What's it mean to local control? Are they going to lose their ability to say no? It's easy to say we need change, but I think like Virgil highlighted earlier when we were talking, having 20 people talk about different change isn't going to get us change.
Right.
And we need to figure out a solution that we can live by that works for all the stakeholders, not just the few that are heard in Sacramento, the moneyed interest, and with all due respect, the unions and these specific interests that don't represent the vast swath of our communities. And it's entirely dysfunctional when you look at a market that's 80% in the illicit market or traditional market. Right. By no measurement can we say this is a success in our view.
Yeah, right. And the struggle as a business owner, right, to not only pay your fees, do it right, create the environment, have that cost go out, but yet you're constantly being subjected to an onerous tax, right? We've talked about taxation as an issue, right? Now, you both led citizen initiatives, and I've worked on a number of citizen initiatives and stuff like that. Do you think that there's a climate up in Sacramento right now? Because I've always tried to remind, and you're all cannabis consumers, right? And that's our audience, right? You're also a cannabis voter. You're a cannabis constituent. And while you may vote many different ways and be a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian or an Independent, at the end of the day, like Prop 13 is a property tax that everybody pays. So it's kind of like a nonpartisan issue. And if we consume cannabis, as a business owner, let's talk about this for a minute. Taxes have become a huge issue, and the only way you can fix taxation, to my understanding, is through a citizen initiative, right? It has to be passed at the ballot box to a certain degree, because it's onerous and it's insufferable to the degree. It's not going to allow this industry forward. Is there an agenda that we can work on in Sacramento right now, or should be working on with them on this?
So, look, I think, there needs to be an agenda, and I think the agenda is created based on the need for change and getting away from the status quo, which will have long-term issues. So if you don't have an agenda, then you have what you have. And if we have what you have and nobody wants it, then we need to have an agenda, right? So I think getting that conversation going. And look, a ballot initiative, there isn't the right time. There isn't the right place. Most of the time, people don't want you to be able to do that in a legislative setting, right? They want to
California is one of those states where they always say, it's a ballot box legislation. We don't know how we're going to survive it, right?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it comes to a point where do you have the right groups and individuals behind a ballot initiative? Do you have the right message, the cause, and the policy behind that ballot initiative? And if you do, sometimes there's no better time than just to go out there and do it. But there has to be a whole series of things that go into place, especially with the state of California being one of the largest, not only legal markets, just so much everything that's going on. But there's never really a right time for it. But when we did the ballot initiative in the city of Long Beach, is because we had to do it, because we were left no options, because we knew there wasn't going to be a change, and we knew that we tried to go through the legislative path for years. And we talked about the issues, and we brought them up, and we reasoned, and we thought the reasons were great reasons. And on the funny part is, they all agreed that our reasons were the right reasons. But then yet, when it come time to change, it wasn't happening.
Yeah. Did you go through a similar experience? Because, I mean, LA is just a huge beast of a city to begin with, right?
Yeah, we battled back and forth with, we did barter and trade, of course. You got to understand, LA being the largest, the fourth largest, fifth largest financial power in the world, it's a different animal when you're talking about LA. The biggest thing we bartered and trade was we took away, retail was 6% taxation. We took 1% away, and then we made cultivation, manufacturing, distribution 2%, and lab testing 1%. So the city's collecting those percentages from the
licensed operators.
The licensed operators. Where we have an issue in the state is the state looks at this as a way to tax and get money. So the state doesn't see it the way the city saw it. The city said, wait a minute, and they listened a little bit. We said we have to get our footing up under us before you begin to just ride down on us with taxes. And so the city kind of allowed that to happen. And then all of a sudden, all these different fees started coming in over the past couple of years. Whereas the state just came out from the gate, hardcore taxation, hardcore regulations, and it just really began to choke us out. Because what they didn't do is they brought no enforcement. What I did praise Long Beach for is their enforcement piece, which was very different from LA. Long Beach came in, they cleaned house first. They shut everything down in the city, and then they started working on a new set of regulations. LA didn't do that. LA just started bringing in the regulations, and now we still have a large portion of the illicit market operating around us, which makes it very difficult. I paid $300,000 on licensing fees just back here less than 6 months ago. But then I got a dude down the street that ain't paying nothing. So I'm already at a $300,000 deficit. I just paid CDTFA $160,000.
As a cultivator, right? Yeah.
No, this is out of my retail.
Really?
I ain't even got to my cultivation yet. This is strictly retail. So look at that. That's $460,000 that I had to pay within a matter of 6 months. Whereas dude down the street, I'm $460,000 behind the 8 ball. Now, if I have $460,000 to do something with, then I may compete with him in some form or fashion. But he 460 ahead of me already.
Right.
Interesting couple comments is one of the problems we have is the way we legalized in 2016. This whole tax and regulate model, what it was the business interest pushed by the political empowerment of DPAs promising high taxes for local cities and communities and a way to solve your tax deficits. You see up in Santa Cruz right now, they're trying to limit cultivation, new cultivation, until they figure it out. That's driven by the tax revenue we're seeing isn't what we thought we'd see.
Right.
And so we're reaping what we sowed 4 years ago, 5 years ago in that whole national push to tax and regulate. The other thing where I'm going to, enforcement, I hear this a lot from the industry, and I get it. It makes sense, right? But 50 years of enforcement, we couldn't enforce out an illicit market. There's only one way to beat a traditional market, illicit market. You got to compete against it.
Yeah, nice.
And the only way we're going to compete against it is get the tax money the hell out of these gentlemen's pockets, get the regulations to be smart, intelligent regulations based on science and, not treating it like plutonium.
Right.
And that means minimizing regulation, minimizing taxing, and having a supply chain that's healthy because you're delivering to every county and city in the state of California, not just 30% of the geography.
Right.
And that can't change because the only way you lower taxes is you got to have a 2/3 majority in the state, and you're not going to get Democrats backed by the unions. The unions are standing in the way of those lower taxes. Why? Because they're benefiting from the general fund income that's coming in a very positive way for like childcare. So I don't knock it, but it's the reality of what you're dealing with. So you will have to go with citizens. And local control you're not going to change without a citizens initiative. And I don't know how you get a healthy supply chain without changing local control.
And by the way, I mean, it was Assemblyman Ting out of San Francisco who had initially floated the idea that if AUMA passed in your community with a 50% or over vote, right, made a lot of sense to me because Sean has used this term with me before, but there's deserts out there, right? So the cannabis marketplace is not growing in the regulated. It's not becoming more and more accepted. And, so here's what I've said on the show a couple of times with some guests. Taxation without representation. I'm not like some, right wing going out there on a limb with this. What I mean by that is, so this industry is a nascent industry and it is a growth industry. It is something doing California proud in that way. We have a lot of the brain trust in the leadership of the industry. But they've reinvested $100 million back into the bureaucracy, right, in the cities, right? But what are they doing with that money to actually help a nascent industry survive this transition? I've always said Uber disrupted taxi cabs the way regulation disrupted cannabis, right? So, I mean, it's the truth to a degree. I mean, what do you guys think about that? I mean, because that's where the governor and the legislature needs to kind of start either redeploying these tax dollars if they're not going to adjust them,
No, there's absolutely nothing that they're doing. And, the sad part about it is when they get this money, then they put it in areas that do nothing to benefit the advancement of the industry that you take from. Just reminds me of the Boston Tea Party all over again.
Right.
Taxation without representation when they started throwing all the stuff overboard of the ships,
You
right?
could throw weed off the Queen Mary.
Exactly.
You know what,
So
it'd be-
throw weed off the Queen Mary. Out there.
You know what
It'd
I'm
be a
saying?
statement.
And so that was a huge statement that was being made. Like, you're not just going to keep taxing us, and then there is no representation. That's how we feel as an industry right now. There is a huge taxation without representation. You look at, just take the city of LA, and I used this analogy before, it's a fact. LA's projected to make a particular number off of the licensed shops that were in the city of LA. When they licensed, and 450 licenses were to be issued, we fought for 500. They only gave us 450. After that was all said and done, money started coming in and we were paying our fees. They went 3 to 4 times over the amount that they projected that they would collect from us. But guess what? They only licensed 200 of us. So there were 250 that didn't get licensed, which they accounted for in that number of what they were going to collect. So when they saw what they just collected from the 200, they were like, oh, shit.
Right.
Opportunity.
And so greed set in.
You want to talk about what we've gotten? Because of the recall election and Governor Newsom going around passing around the dough, we got a bailout of the local regulators who couldn't pay for themselves with these fourfold payments, so who are now making it unable for these gentlemen to operate in local control. So we bailed out local control with $100 million. They demanded that local regulation. The prohibition said local control, we want the ability to say no.
Well, that was the League of California Cities, and you
now,
talked about vested constituencies, right?
Right, and now you can't even pay for the regulation you want, and you get a bailout from the state.
Right.
If that's some not ironic shit, I don't know what is.
Well, I'll tell you this. So, in 2016, you talk about reaping what we sow, right? From the Prop 64.
Right.
Now, let's go back to understand the environment before 2016.
Right.
In many cases, a couple of things. One, If you're an active advocate for the cannabis industry,
Right.
you are a target. So today we have a lot of people, they're going out there, I know the cannabis industry and we're going to do this and I want this.
Got
and
arrested in 2015. I know.
You know, but
after being
you
on
know,
CNN.
it was a whole different landscape. When you were an advocate in
Right.
2010, 9, 12, 13, you could have become a target, right?
Right.
And you could have been harassed, you could have been arrested, you could have had the IRS sent to you, the Board of Equalization, whatever it is that would come after you. So one. But then also, coming out of that type of stigma mentality, dealing as on the cannabis side of things, then the other part is, well, how do we get everybody to move forward on cannabis legislation? Well, taxes, right? Everybody's gonna love taxes. Everyone, the state's gotta, you know, that was for the longest time, you know, the biggest motivator for legalization. I mean, I think, you know, is it safe access? Is it patience? Is it this? No, I mean, look, in 2010 when Prop 19 happened, right? The city of Long Beach put a counter ballot initiative that said, if Prop 19 passed, we want to put a 25% retail tax in the city if we end up having it, right? So that was, it was a sin tax, right? So that was the sin tax that was installed to be able to get everybody to kind of swallow, you know, this cannabis pill, right?
Which to me is just always so hard to bear, knowing that there's a holistic wellness, a true medicinal benefit to our product,
It is.
and an adult choice, you know, recreational use of it, right?
Well, I mean, today we talk
But
about
that
adult
stigma's there,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, today we talk about adult use and how it's at, but you know, back in those days, it was 100% medicinal, right? That's all we were talking about.
Absolutely.
Medicinal medicine doesn't get taxed in the state of California.
That's right.
There is no taxes on medicines in the state of California. So it really, I think the idea of medicine, I think people understood, and unless if these legislators or these people making decisions had a personal encounter with a family member that was hurt or experiencing some sort of ailment or illness where cannabis helped them, that's when the aha moment, this could be something more. But those were very seldom to happen. So today we're dealing with the stigma that pushed and put the legislation, and now 4 or 5 years later, we're still dealing with the stigma from 15 and 20 years ago. It's just manifesting right now in the industry from a taxation and a regulation perspective.
I think, Adam, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what I heard from you was saying that the motives at the time under Prop 16 were because of the right of 215 wasn't a great legal defense in the court and everyone was being harassed.
Yo, that's
I mean, basically.
Yeah.
So the problem with 264 was for lack of representation beyond, you know, the political elite, because we know, I'm sure you're aware, everyone's, Sean Parker came in with the money, DPA came in the money, they got their way, everyone else got pushed out. All the other groups or his other initiatives out there got silenced, pushed to the side. And so the question is, it was bad. What's good public policy? That's really the question here. And I don't see how you get around the fact whether 64 motives were righteous or not, it's not working. So how do we get it to work?
Right, and that's something that we should talk about too. So the Department of Cannabis Control is the state's kind of second or third move past the passage of AUMA, right, in 2016. And that's something we all recently know, and something I brought up at the beginning of the show. And Virgil, I want to get to this with you specifically, which is they're going to appoint someone to start leading a social equity team within that new Department of Cannabis Control, an actual appointment. But this is a topic that I know also Adam and the Long Beach Collective Association have been working on with the city, which is, what does social equity mean in terms of what people who paved, the pioneers of the industry, are seeing today actually happening at the state level? And is it functioning, and is it something that we need to address as well?
So it's something to me that always should be addressed. Social equity and what it truly should, and when I brought it to the city of Los Angeles, because social equity wouldn't exist in LA if I didn't bring it to them, because nobody was even thinking about pushing legislation on that level. It is giving the opportunity, and this is what I meant for social equity to do, was give someone an opportunity that would not otherwise get to be a owner and an operator in the cannabis space, regardless of their cannabis felony or misdemeanor. Now, it had nothing to do with race or color, and the reason why I did not base it on race or color is because of was that Prop 208 and then the banning of affirmative action. So that would have received a lot of litigation And so then me even bringing that about knew that I would negatively impact a community that has already been negatively impacted, right?
Right.
So what was the smart way to do it? Well, let's look at what the zip codes that law enforcement targeted. So the same map that they target, law enforcement target, we said we'll target with licensing, right? So there, of course, if there was no, I guess, law against law enforcement targeting predominantly the black community, so why should there be any law against us targeting predominantly the black community within social equity? So that was the whole essence of social equity. Make sure that everybody had a fair opportunity to apply and for licensing and be legal in the industry, like I say, that they would not be otherwise. Once it was unanimously voted on by City Council and passed, then it fell into the hands of DCR. Once that happened, it just went to shit.
And as we use acronyms, the Department of Cannabis Regulation in the City of Los Angeles, right?
Yes.
Now, so you had to take care of social equity at the municipal level,
Yes.
right? Do you think the state's been addressing it effectively, or if at all?
So Governor Brown came in with actually passing a social equity situation. It wasn't very clear, but it was just basically a blank. That was just his way of saying, okay, we're going to have a statewide social equity program. Nothing never really rolled out in detail of how that would work, how it will work within municipalities or anything. It was just, this is where we're going with it, right? Now they want to appoint somebody to lead the social equity program. Oh man, God bless us there.
And so, Adam, I got to ask you, right? So you guys in Long Beach also had to work with the city to forge some sort of social equity process. The state didn't have any role in that. Is that correct?
No, state had no role in it, and I'll tell you something. It's a very sensitive subject, and it's a very complicated subject.
No doubt about it.
You know, and I think, you know, for a lot of people, they gotta be able to recognize and respect the fact that maybe a lot of people don't understand what the war on drugs because they didn't go through it, right? And the people that went through it, it doesn't matter how many businesses you give them, they're never going to be whole again, right? And some people don't even want the cannabis industry. They don't even want to be a part of it, but their lives were still ruined. And what about those people as well? So when you're talking about a social justice issue that goes all the way from the industry to the communities that are impacted, it's very complicated. And I think to what Virgil was saying right now, we've been dealing with equity policies, and we're rolling out and trying to work and advocate for good policies. What the city of Long Beach originally did was our first attempt to, and again, this is something that was coming up and we were working with the city to bring this forward, was we concentrated on the hiring process, right? So right now, 40% of all of the people that work within the legal cannabis industry in the city of Long Beach have to be part of the social equity program, or you're making your best effort to make sure that 40% of your staff are from a social equity or from certain backgrounds, whether it's being arrested, certain zip codes, census tracts, so on and so forth, right? But today, what Virgil exactly just said of what the goal is supposed to be for social equity, we're trying to work backwards to a policy that can actually give a real roadmap to what that looks like from the cannabis industry. Now, the city should be dedicating dollars to certain areas, certain folks, certain people. That is a whole different conversation, and that is an equally as important conversation. But a lot of the times the government doesn't want to have that conversation because that means they got to pay the tax dollars.
That's right.
So that is a tougher conversation. So what's the easiest conversation? How can we put it on the industry? And since these licenses have come out, what can we deal with the framework? Now, we believe in being inclusive. You have to be, right?
Cannabis is a culture in general. That's one of the things we talk about being lost.
Yeah.
The culture is an inclusive culture. Virgil was bringing that up in the early nascent days of compliant operations. People used to be very supportive of each other in a community fashion, right?
I would say let's look at the history. Let's go back. So I grew up in Compton, Watts, LA, East Side, what we call the East Side LA, all the way to the West Side. I grew up in those territories, Long Beach, all of that was areas that I roamed when I was younger. When you talk about who grew cannabis, it was always a white face to it, right? That was just automatically known in our community. When you talk about who sold cannabis, it was always a black face to it, right? So Humboldt grew, mainly white folks, and South Central LA, Compton, Watts, and all the surrounding areas was where weed was distributed. When I started out on the street level, and everybody that was dealing weed looked like me. Even in the city of Compton, there were white people coming from all over this was back in the chronic days, back in the Dr. Dre, Snoop, all of that. That whole Eazy-E era, I was one of the major weed dealers on the street.
Yeah.
And I seen everybody coming to the places that I supplied within these cities. And so you got to look at that from that perspective. We can't just fast forward and say, no, that didn't happen. And the people that were going to jail looked like me. There were people in Humboldt that were being arrested and going to jail, cultivators, but nowhere close to how many people that were going to jail for street dealing, right? So when we talk about impacted in that sense, we can't just talk about the soft level of how it was impacted. And I agree with you. Nothing's going to change that. My ex-wife and kids still to this day feel every bit of those 6 years that I spent in federal prison for this industry. Right. They feel it even to this day, and it's a touchy conversation for them. That'll never change. But what you can do is create policy that gives people that pathway, with a pathway with no barriers to entry into the cannabis industry, not as an employee, but as an owner and operator, for a true opportunity to say you can own this. Now, it's up to them to make it or fail, right? But at least open up that opportunity to the community that you did marginalize for so many decades, starting from the late 80s to present day.
Right. A lot of the racial issues I think that you were pointing to, as well as, there were a lot of people, criminal enforcement lost their homes, lost their properties up in Humboldt County, and that might have been, a different audience than the folks who were getting arrested and incarcerated in the inner cities, right? Racial disparity is an unequivocal, it is completely evident, right? And Sean, I want to ask you about this because, this is another thing about social equity. You talk about the California Minority Alliance, but you're also active nationally in that mindset. Yes. That they're looking at social equity applying to disabled veterans as well. Do you think that there's a place in California's dialogue to including that?
No. I mean, I think, listen, first of all, let me just say what Virgil has done in LA was awesome. I benefited from that social equity. I'm a social equity candidate. Nothing came of it because of the disasters of what DCR happened. But what Donnie and Virgil put forward and advocated was a home run in terms of identifying and making it easy for people to get accessible to be qualified for that social equity candidate. The city and the regulators beyond screwed it up in so many different ways. Listen, with CCRI, we identified the first problem is who is social equity, and I think Virgil articulated the problem, which is in the state of California you can't make it about race, but in the same sense we can't deny the war on drugs. And so the question is, what is effective policy? Is effective policy like Fresno giving 4 licenses to social equity while the other 20 go to whoever who corporate on local control? I don't think that's in the spirit of social equity, right? I think uplifting the communities, so we're on the front lines of the drug war, which is predominantly poor black and brown communities, and that's not for poor white communities, because at the end of the day, they're poor too, and so we can't make it about race. Let's make it about class. Let's make it about those people who are being kept down. And I think what we approach it as is identifying it in a way that's a little bit unique in the California cannabis. We say anyone who arrested. Well, we know who got arrested at a disproportionate rate. Absolutely. So now we're going to impact that disproportionate community that needs to be identified. And what do we do with that? Right. And at the end of the day, let me tell you, Ronald Reagan, our ex-governor, and I'm a Bernie bro, but let me tell you, he's absolutely right. When someone knocks on your door and they say you're from government, run. Right. Because I've yet to find a progressive in California that can put a model on the table that works. We have models that work. We don't need to reinvent markets. We understand how markets work. What does Amazon want when they come to town? They don't want government helping hand. They just want, give me a tax credit. Mm-hmm. So give every arrested person out there a tax credit that they can use for licensing, that they can use for local and state taxes, they can use for cannabis fees, and guess what? Don't tell them what they can do with it. You can get 10 people from Compton to chain their tax credit together, and now you have real money to go out and get a property, to get a license.
I think I remember in our discussion you mentioning this as one of the things you think is part of. So for the state level, do you think there's going to be any progress made from the social equity perspective that can help some of these local programs you guys have been working on?
I believe so. If we push that, I believe if we stand by and allow government to do what they've been doing, it won't happen.
Right.
We, the people, have to speak up boldly, strongly, and firmly. And we have to be willing to put something on the line. So a lot of people are, people come to me, oh man, I really believe in this. Really? Do you? Mm-hmm. What you willing to give? What are you willing to truly sacrifice? See, when people got their licenses in the city of LA, they got quiet. Why? Because they weren't going to sacrifice losing that license by running their mouth. I stayed running my mouth. And guess what? They came and tried to attack me and take all 3 of my stores, right? So they tried to take 3 of my stores. That's why I had to pay that $300,000 to stay in business. And so there is so much screwed up with this, but I won't be quiet. I don't care. We definitely have to stay focused, but we got to stay together. Yeah. If they try to take Sean's life, they got to take mine. Mm-hmm. They try to take yours, they got to take mine. We have to stand together and be willing to sacrifice it all, or else what are we doing this for?
Right. And let me comment on things. I do believe there's a place for veterans at that social equity table. I'm not saying, but I don't think that's the right way to approach it. I think we have to look at it differently. The other half of part of social equity, I think was alluded over here, is government spending. Listen, Colorado won legalization on the forefront of everything because I was in Colorado when I was lobbying for Sue's research. I would hear on the local TV, $5 million has been allocated to this small town to help homeless, to go to the library, to go to the school. People saw those cannabis dollars going to their community. So now that stigmatization is harder to make when they know little Johnny got a computer or, those homeless vets now have warm shelter and food, they're okay with cannabis, right? We're sending it to the general fund. No one knows where it's going to. And all they see in cannabis is we're making $2.5 billion in taxes. But the reality is our tax rate per person is so much lower than Colorado. So we're not efficiently doing this thing. So we can do it all. So my point is we have to spend the money on those communities. So in California cannabis, half of it goes to education, half of it goes to secondary. Pre-K to high school in communities that are underperforming on metrics we use every day for food stamps, for every other community that identifies those communities. That's where that money needs to be spent. Environment, we spend 20% on the environment. You talk about C.V.C.A.N. We have a clean water problem, right? Well, let's take 5%. We say 25% goes to the environment. Let's spend 5% on clean water, right? Let's spend it on making these communities safer and healthier.
C.V.C.A.N. is so complex.
You want to see them support cannabis? Start spending money in their community from cannabis tax dollars.
If I could just say something real quick.
Of course.
So here's let's fast forward to today, right? September 16th, 2021. The problem right now with social equity, besides the government non-spending, and I think we can talk more about that, is that now the social equity business has become into a business, right? Yes. And I think there's a lot of people that are taking advantage of social equity applicants and the situation to the point where it has actually handcuffed any type of progress for any type of real program to take footing. So what you end up in a situation is, you have right now a person that's signing these contracts, being offered. I'm a person. I come from a certain economic background. I've been arrested, and somebody comes offering me $10,000 or $15,000 a month to sign my name on it, look pretty, be able to say that I'm the owner. But then on the back, I have management contracts and I have all these things. And then sooner or later, when they sell that or they do something else with it, they're not going to be able to share it with that equity person. So the idea of ownership is not ownership. We're actually now using and targeting the same community that doesn't get to Virgil's ownership. And I think if you're going to do it, you should do it right. So what we're doing right now in Long Beach is we're looking at ways to protect the actual social equity applicant. So here's the thing. Everybody, we want to vet the social equity applicant. Okay, what do you want to vet? He's been fucking arrested. He's bad economic perspective, and we know exactly what's going on. Why aren't we vetting the investors?
Right.
Why aren't we vetting these consultants, these so-called consultants that help these equity folks? These investors that are coming in, let's see their background. Let's see how they've dealt with other things. Let's get to know how they are, and let's see some of these documents to be, put in, so that way we can hold them. Is there a complaint line? How can we come back and remedy a
So
situation?
my question is, it goes back to the local control and the issues that we face because of it. Is it better that the state provide a solution and a pathway that applies, like you were saying? Maybe someone doesn't want to own a business. Maybe someone says, I will own a business and I'm going to make it so, right? Which is your story, Virgil, right?
I think one word and that you can say, access to capital. That eliminates the investor. So now we don't even have to vet an investor. And I don't have somebody that I got to be tied to that I really don't want to be tied to, right? So if you give us access, that has always been a problem in the black community. We have not had access to capital. I don't care if it's for a home loan, for a car loan, or whatever you call it, that has been removed from our community in so many different ways. And that's why our community stays the way it is. Access to funds, to capital, to programs, to things that will better our community have all been taken from our community. So when you give us access to these same things, and that was why I was saying access to licensing. Now you give us access to capital. I can go to this bank or I can go to this institution and get this loan, and then now it's up to me to sink or swim.
And we know how to do that. Wall Street does it all the time. We sell tax credits. Now that person, that social equity candidate, go, I can start my business. What about that 63-year-old who was arrested in the 80s, spent 6 years in jail, and I'm too old to run a business? He can go to Virgil and say, I'm a tax credit. Now we can set up a program where you say you have to give them a certain amount of money, whatever, and you trade that tax credit. There's an identifiable market just on Wall Street for tax credits. It is disintermediating all the bullshit, because what you do when you create these social equity programs is get all this interest. The education person wants in, so their education materials and presentations are put in. And it's just get out of the way. Get out of people's way and let the entrepreneurs find the talent. And if we arm the people in the community with the talent, that access to capital, if you said every misdemeanor was $25,000 and every felony was $100,000 and every year you spend in jail is another $100,000, you're putting money directly in, because in Fresno, in that model, you're getting 4 people who probably aren't even from the community, 3 are politically connected, and calling them social equity. Versus if we give everyone in Fresno who's been arrested by cannabis a tax credit, you're disproportionately impacting the black and brown community. You're not leaving behind poor white people who have a lot of the same problems. In fact, you're bringing people together now to give that singular voice and say, hey, we're on the same side.
Well, I'll tell you something about financing. So we're the cannabis industry, and financing is a big problem for us, right?
Absolutely.
We can barely
that
get a
federal
bank account.
question
Right.
is that banking question. The
So-
fact you can't get prime rates, you can't get small business administration loans, all that.
These typical
Absolutely.
institutions are a problem for us right now, right? So that's one. 2, when it comes to the financing and the funding of things, I think at the end of the day, you have to have a very specific way to do it, or it's going to be where it's at right now, which is a few things. 1, we can be able to dedicate tax dollars that's going to the state. We invest them back into cannabis equity operators. Is that going to pay for the whole entire ticket? No, but that can help, right? It's not one thing that's going to fix it. 2, the state can create a bond, or maybe some sort of bond that can be created that can be able to go in this. And then the third thing is, if you are going to work with an investor, you have to work with a like-minded investor that believes in the cause, not wants to take advantage of it so that way they can have that. So for example, we see a lot of different angel investors and investors that deal with like women-owned businesses, right? You have to have a specific criteria to be able, and then you can plug into all these women-owned businesses, right? And those people that are investors is because they want to support women causes, and they actually want to be helping get more businesses, and so on and so forth. So in the equity lens, if you're getting more people that are like-minded, that believe in the cause, that understand the importance of the cause, they're not going to be as predatory when they come to the table to help, because they want to find the right person, they want to help the community. That's not easy to find.
It's almost like when you say an accredited investor, like you can only shop an investment to an accredited investor, having accredited social equity partners for people. Like somebody has said, you've already passed a certain standard, you're not an exploitative opportunist in this situation, but you're actually somebody who cares about the industry and wants to bring in people who paid the price and have something still to give, right?
But I still think, I still think that if we think of it from an investor point of view, I think we're missing the mark. And that's coming from me and my perspective. If I'm a person who knows and has just knowledge, there are so many brothers that I knew that grew up on the block in my community that could have ran Fortune 500 companies, but they were the biggest drug dealers in the city of Los Angeles, and they understood commodities. They understood how to buy low, sell high. They understood that money exchange. They understood the stock market up and down, but they knew it on the street level. If those cats were equipped with the right utensils and tools, then they could have ran a Fortune 500
And I always say regulation disrupted cannabis, the way Uber disrupted taxi cab. For that reason, some of the greatest branches. Guys, and Sean, I don't want to cut you off, because I want to get into this thought and from the three of you. And you spent some time up in Sacramento, and you've worked with a lot of forces up there, and I know you two all have opinions. Is there anybody, we've talked about the governor, and he needs to be listening to us. And Governor Newsom, I want to personally say, the reason I have these three gentlemen here is what they represent. They represent constituent voters throughout the state of California. 2022 is coming up. Veterans, the Minority Alliance, the cities of Los Angeles and Long Beach, the cannabis culture. But is there any politician right now that you guys, and each one of you may have someone to mention here, that should be supported for the the work they do for the cannabis consumer, that is still out there listening to us and helping us move agendas forward at the state level? Because I don't want to miss out on some of the topics we all said that we talk about.
One politician who impresses me, who understands there's an issue and understands that we need to address it, is Fiona Mao.
Interesting.
Treasurer. She understands. She knows the tax rate needs to be a lot
lower. She was collecting tax revenue in the Prop 215 complaint.
She understands what's wrong. She understands the problem. But as treasurer, she understands it too well. But she is consistently in her office by far. If I said, who's a politician I see in Sacramento and talk to in an office who gets it, it's her.
Interesting. And by the way, I remember her from her days. Like I said, she's been with the Franchise Tax Board. She's now treasurer.
She understands it's an economic problem.
Do you two have Los Angeles has a number of representatives in state senate, assembly. Are you finding anybody in your community that?
I would agree with Sean. Fiona Mall for sure. Mike Gibson, he understands it. He's always been a supporter. Reggie Jones Sawyer. He's been a supporter. Bonta has been a supporter. So you have a few within the assembly, and you have a few within that Sacramento legislation, and there are a few more that I met with even on the Republican side. There are a few, because I met with a few Republicans. Can't call their names off the top, but they were super supportive of what we were trying to do when we met with them and understood. And of course, the Republicans always go to economics. And so it was easy talking economics, and they were like, we get it. Your tax too high. You can't make enough money. You're going to die soon.
It was funny.
Bottom line.
And Adam, I want to get to you on that level, because Long Beach has a number of assembly and senate members.
Of course. I mean, look, all of the people that you guys are mentioning are awesome people, right? Bonta, and now the Attorney General. I think that gives us a different lens that we can get in that office, which is huge, even though he was taken out of the legislation process as well. We have our assembly and senators, which is Lena Gonzalez and Patrick O'Donnell. We actually worked on a bill with Assemblymember O'Donnell a couple of years ago, trying to pass some stuff. On a local level, I mean, I think all of our elected officials, we've had a lot of success working with each other, and that's just due to the communication. Not something that's very typical that you see is our city prosecutor's office locally, right? He's actually one of the only elected city prosecutors in the state of California. I think there's only like one or two or maybe three at most. But not because of the long-standing history, to say. Even though in 2010 and back in those days, he showed to understand the human element, and that putting people behind jail is not the only way to go about this. So I respected that. But it's also right now being in part of that law enforcement community and coming out and talking about cannabis industry in a way that is not filled with stigma, or we don't want to deal with these people, they're drug dealers, they're gang members, and having that type of voice in that type of setting doesn't come off too often. So I think it's important to highlight those voices, so that way we can continue to see more those voices. And today we enjoy a really good relationship with working on all of the issues that come up.
And Sean, you were going to say something before.
No, I was just going to highlight a Republican who actually supported SB 34. That's Devin Mathis from Kern County, and you know him, like, you support weed.
Yeah.
He's a veteran. He's the only enlisted veteran in the entire assembly.
Really?
And you'd be surprised.
Wow.
We actually had
Oh, yeah.
SB 34 was has been one of the few bills that has passed, right? And they would call us in when the Republicans, we had to switch votes, and we got lots of stories, but consistently it was really about the opiate crisis, and it was really about you owing it to veterans, and that really works for him. And I think Devin is very supportive of cannabis access for that reason, and I think that he can justify. I've seen him in Kern County stand up and say, "Why do you support weed?" He straight up says, "Listen, our veterans who gave all are at home suffering, and we need to step up for them." And cannabis, UC Davis just came out.
Holistic wellness, medicinal wellness.
UC Davis, University of California Davis, just came out and published in the British Journal of Medicine, where legal cannabis dispensaries exist, opiate overdoses are lower, and it's a safer choice. Whether you like it or not, it is a safer choice.
Colorado's down at least by 25%.
There's a lot of studies. We've confirmed suicides are down, domestic violence is down where cannabis is available. All the ills. You talk about best public policy. That's why it's real simple. Make it about access. It's a better public policy. It's better than alcohol. It's better than tobacco. It's better than the opiates. You have less of those societal problems you have. Turn local control's argument on its face.
It's funny that I have not heard any of you mention Assemblymember Ting from that perspective. He was the one who really proposed something, and it kind of died on the vine for some reason. But it makes sense to me because I understand the League of California Cities, and I understand local control, time, place, and manner, right? You know, can you be open to midnight? Los Angeles is probably a city that never sleeps, right? Staying open until midnight, 1 o'clock.
Zoning.
Some good, right? But, you know, like, but the idea that there's so many communities that have not opened it up, it stymies the growth of the regulated industry. It's hurting cultivators who have less access through the regulated market to retail, you know, consumer touch points, right? Yeah. And, you know, maybe Los Angeles has enough, maybe Long Beach has a bunch, right? And maybe nothing needs to change there in terms of how those are rolling out, but across the state, something needs to be done. So this is where I think we should get to the final kind of phase of this. You know, one of the reasons that I started doing this show is I played a role as an activist entrepreneur, as someone who worked in the business of this industry, but really returned back to his activist roots. So that's why I agreed to host Cannabis Capitol's Pop Politics, right? And having the three of you on the stage right now, and we've all talked about various things as a solution. You know, Sean and the Weed for Warriors Project sponsored a legislative draft of something they called the California Cannabis Reform Initiative. And that was one of the first things I talked about on this program format. And the two of you have nothing to do with that piece of legislation. But one of the things Sean did, and I attended one of his meetings, was he said, I want industry input on what we think the problems are. So in a perfect world, hypothetically, and I'm going to start with you two, right? And I'm going to ask Adam, we'll come this way. What do you think should be the priorities, and do you think that there is room for the industry to return to the unified mindset in 2016 on pushing a legislative agenda forward, and if necessary, going back to the ballot to fix what's wrong with AUMA?
The short answer is yes. Do I think that that's possible? Absolutely, it's possible. Like I said, us as an organization locally in the Long Beach Collective Association, we got together because of a crisis, right? There was a looming threat on safe access, on the industry, on arrests, communities, so many different things. And I think that today we do have that crisis, right? Right now we got 800 so dispensaries throughout the state of California. When we can at least probably have 4,000 or 5,000 of them, to say in regards to looking at maybe a potential supply and demand, and that's not an exact number, to say. I think that there are more people that know that this is not working the way it is as it stands right now than people that go and say, oh yeah, this is just great and it's just working out. So I think that what we're talking about is already on a lot of people's minds. And when they go and pay those licensing fees, just like I paid those licensing fees, and when I go pay to the taxes, and because I'm dispensary, I'm also cultivation, distribution,
right.
So I see the whole gamut of the taxes, and then on top of it, we pay taxes on the taxes, right? A lot of people don't know that it's taxes on the taxes, right? So it's tax on tax on tax, right? So when you're dealing with that type of situation, the reality is, we're going to have a tough time getting off the ground. I mean, we have been having a tough time. I mean, I even came out and we were saying, let's just for 3 years, don't eliminate it. Just pause it. Pause the cultivation tax, the excise tax,
Everything.
all these taxes for 3 years. If you can give us 3 years to get a little bit of footing, let's assess. Maybe we actually widen the tax base. So something we did in the city of Long Beach, we lowered the taxes for all of the other type licenses to 1%. Since then, the city has seen increases in the taxes. So
Thank you.
it's possible.
The rising tide can float all boats in that way.
It can
The more
work, right? But I think there's definitely a need for the states. I think there's definitely a need for all true advocates, for all the leaders of their communities that care about the industry to come together and talk. And look, the ego is not always your amigo, right? I think at the end of the day, we really got to be able to focus on the issues. And I know at the minimum, there's at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that everybody can agree on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if that's what we can agree on, let's put the things that we disagree on and let's focus the hell on the things that we agree on, because let's get what we can.
Yeah, I agree. Taxation, lowering of taxes, softening of regulations, bring upon the enforcement in a proper manner so that the market can be robust, access to capital, and not just for social equity, but for the industry as a whole. Because even me, who I don't even get an opportunity to apply for social equity, because I already have 3 retails under phase 1, 3 micro businesses under phase 1, so I'm eliminated from even applying for another retail in LA. But I think those things, access to capital, softening regulation, lowering taxes, and those are the key components to once again making this a robust market. Take it out of the hands of the people that are slowing this thing down and speed this thing back up. Like Sean said, we need to open this up. There are 250 licenses that should have been issued out 4 years ago. What are we doing?
Right.
We're still allowing the illicit market to thrive, and
I
there's
think
nothing stopping that.
There's so much truth to what you guys are saying. I think right now the time is almost uniquely appropriate because common ground has gotten so far out of politics. It's all polarized, right? That there's an issue like this, that the Cannabis Voter Project or something like that, right? Where we should start gathering that mindset and rattle the saber a little bit and prove if they can qualify this recall, right, and disrupt government and disrupt the money, and cost whatever money. I mean, cannabis should be able to get back on the ballot to fix some of the things that the government can't, because it's a citizen initiative. Prop 64 was a citizen initiative, right? So it's got a plenary power, is what they call it, all encompassing, right? And so to change it, we probably may have to, in some of these taxation areas, go back to the ballot box at some point. And Sean, we've talked about this. I mean, you brought it up. You just got some of the input.
I say
that
it
you
sounds
took
like
from
Virgil's a big fan of CCRI. I think we deal with all those issues.
Right? And my question to you is you've talked about 2022, 2024. You've introduced it in the language-wise. What do you think the chances are for things getting fixed without an initiative? And if not, do you think the California Cannabis Reform Initiative is a good starting point for the industry to start to kind of coalesce around?
Well, we've said likely 2024 is the run for this, just being a presidential year election, most likely to succeed. Prop 19 failed non-presidential election year. That's the common sense view. Do I think it can be successful in 2022? Yes, but who's going to pay for it? That's the big issue when we're dealing with the big guys, ladies. They know 2024, so that's where we're finding the interest. I'm open. I think we could do a citizens initiative. There's really a couple comments. One, why we need it. Colorado has about 1,100 dispensaries. They have 5 million people. I have a little over under 800, 700, about 50 dispensaries in California for 45 million people. On a per capita basis, we need almost 10,000 dispensaries just to equate to what's access in Colorado, where we're seeing a real good beat up of the illicit market there because pricing and you have a good, healthy market, right? So that's the first. Second, in California, the tax revenue per population is something like $60 or something. It's a third. In Colorado, it's a third of that per population in California. So for all these people who point out $2.5 million, if you had access and the number of stores and the commerce capturing the illicit market, your tax revenue would blow through the roof. The problem we run into the state is this. Go try to argue the Laffer curve to a bunch of liberal Democrats and unions. They do not care. They do not want to hear it. And so that's where we start getting other stakeholders involved who are just going to thwart any attempt to lower taxes through legislation. We have a lot of regulatory capture. So there's people benefiting from this overregulation. And they're going to be on the other side of fighting, changing that, right? Some of the absurd stuff we have to do, all waste, way we deal with the waste here is all lobbied by the waste industry now to charge these guys a tremendous amount of money for the shit they got to throw away. California cannabis is a case study of what is wrong with California in general. And that is we have a government by the elite, it works for the elite, and the average person, man and woman, it doesn't work for. Mm-hmm. And the cannabis community is telling you it's not working for them because 80% of them are shopping down the illicit market. So how do we change it? We have to embrace what makes America great, the industry. The only way we're going to change that is the citizens industry in California because of the pragmatic reality of who we're dealing with, right? And I think we can find that density. You want a healthy supply chain. You don't want to just open up to anyone because then it's a race to the bottom, right? Mm-hmm. The Ting Amendment, you mentioned it. That's what we adopted, 1 in 15,000. That's reasonable. Most of your San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, San Diego, they're already there. We're not asking for much more. Might have to give a little bit more, but that's it. What we're doing is we're getting rid of the cultivation tax. We get rid of it. It's gone for good. Not 3 years. It's gone. It is the most unhealthy, unproductive tax in the world. For example, we're buying $300 pounds to turn into medicine. I have to spend $455 because I got to send.
That's where you guys are saying you're paying tax on tax, right?
I got to send 60% of my medicine, my cost.
After the manufacturing, there's more
patients
tax.
are paying 50% of the cost of flour to tax, just on the dollar because it's a fixed amount of $155. Right? So cultivation tax is gone. That will be the biggest help, I think, to the industry you can give them short term. Second, we take the excise tax to 5% because what we've seen with polling is people want their taxes to pay for something good in California. Mm-hmm. So now we take that 5% tax rate, we capture the 80% of the illicit market. Your tax returns are going to boom through the roof. You're you're going to make so much more. And now we have money to spend on the communities in need.
That's funny because the grand jury report on the Orange County adult use regulated marketplace was funny. It said $20 million had been made since the institution of that, and that it had benefited youth programs throughout the city of Santa Ana. And I was laughing as only potheads are supporting children's programs in their community, right? What does that say about how onerous that taxation is? That only people who consume cannabis are providing
better. And I'm going to come out publicly, and I love the unions, and I love the Teamsters, and I love the UFCW, although they've been on the wrong side of axis, we got to be honest. They made $150 million out of the tax revenue to pay for health care for the SEIU, state employees. I mean, for child care, pre-K child care, for working mothers. Greatest program in the world. Let's expand that to all working class mothers in need in these communities. Let's offer mothers who have to go to work in many communities, mostly single mothers, let's be honest with you. Let's give them pre-K, universal pre-K. You want to see massive support for cannabis? Just take the tax revenue and give it to working moms as pre-K. You cannot turn that down. We don't think smartly in this thing. Why are we letting Sacramento and the special interests dictate to us how our tax dollars should be spent? Let's Prop 13, Prop 64. I've always said you brought up Prop 13.
I believe it truly applies to the cannabis industry.
It does. Let's take our cannabis industry back.
Everyone in between consumes cannabis for different reasons. Well, guys, I really want to say thank you a lot. And I'm going to tell the audience and the viewer audience, pop politics was really meant to be a place for us to find the common ground, both as an industry, as activists in the industry, to be able to start to recognize the power of our industry. But one of the things, we used to be a squeaky wheel, so to speak. We used to be a lot more front and center. And to Virgil's point, I think all of us have made that point tonight, we got a little complacent, so to speak, right? Yeah. We started losing it. So just getting these three gentlemen to sit down with me, and we are missing Mr. Donnie Anderson tonight, but he had reasons for not being here, and he co-founded the California Minority Alliance. He was a co-proponent of Measure M with Virgil, and we hope that blessings are being bestowed upon you now and that things are all right. But what I will say is that we need to be a unified voice, and they say to have a forest, you need to plant a tree 20 years in advance or whatever, right? Like right now it's 2021. If we're not having these discussions now, the governor just got, supported through a recall by a lot of voters in California. And if you're a cannabis voter and you believe it's an issue of importance for the reasons that we all do and the many others that are out there, you need to let your assembly people, your state senators, we need to start coalescing that. So between now and the end of the year, I really think a California cannabis voter platform, right, to start gathering our energies together. And to your point, Adam, you said you work with 20 organizations right now trying to bring this together. We need to start harmonizing the power of the individual consumer and voter, because they're paying their taxes too high as much as it is for the business, right? And so I want to say thank you to you gentlemen for being here tonight. And I want you all to know that we're going to continue to be a place for a cannabis consumer to get some PBS style content on what's going on in the political reality here in California, from voices that have actually led the movement forward. And I want to thank you all gentlemen for your time tonight. And we'll look forward to keeping in touch. And if there's ever anything you need from us, you'll let us know. Amen. And thank you so much. So,
Thank you.
all right.